Or is he? I don't know. This guy, OP. So I'm making a video on KARAMBIT. Because in my opinion, he's an amazing unit for a lot of content in this game. Mostly it's focused on PvE content, but he does pull his weight in some PvP scenarios as well. Mostly from what I've seen in either real-time arena or the battlefield, but works in a lot of content as well as a replacement to some other attackers due to his first kill, which we'll review in a second. So first of all, what is KARAMBIT? Why is he so good? So the main point on why I'm making this is because this unit is completely free. You can get it from the last story here, and after you complete it, just a few easy quests, you'll be able to unlock this Nat 5 completely for free. Jumping on to why he is good and why he may be better than other units. So I think the first comparison of the unit you can make with is probably the free one we also recently had is the Theomars. Both of them are solely focused on dishing out as many basic attacks as possible. So Theomars mostly focuses on doing raw damage and sometimes providing those frostbite effects for additional damage over time, and his main selling point is, let me find it, this endure passive. So once he falls really low in HP, he gets level 10 attack speed and endure for like 13 seconds or so, I believe. So this is probably the closest comparison you can find to KARAMBIT. And just to jump the gun, to see how I feel about the KARAMBIT versus Theomars matchup, you can see that my Theomars is now restored to base 5 stars and no longer used, just because KARAMBIT simply replaced him in all scenarios. There are also scenarios where Theomars is still better than KARAMBIT, but those are mostly in PvP. So as I try to focus a lot on PvE and leave PvP just to the side and simply do a few auto battles and forget it, KARAMBIT is way more important for me and for my progress. The upsides you have to Theomars are, of course, first of all, that his attacks are ranged while KARAMBIT's attacks are melee. So if you do not have an additional tank to sit in the front line, your KARAMBIT might get targeted a lot and die pretty quickly. The second point is that Theomars does have a little bit of more survivability. So being range, first of all, he gets targeted less, and second of all, he does have that endure passive, which allows him to stay alive for like 13 to 15 seconds extra. Whilst KARAMBIT, well, if he receives little damage, he simply dies. However, KARAMBIT does have some sustain, if you can call it that. So his second skill does grant him level 2 evasion up, and if you are unsure, evasion is 40% for basic attacks. So that means he will be dodging around 40% of the basic attacks, which allows him to just have that additional counter to a lot of damage that is dealt in the game. And the main important point why he's insanely OP is his first skill, of course. Well, it's coupled with the passive, but it's mostly in his first skill is the fact that he has a 35% chance to ignore defense as well as ignore all beneficial effects. That means he counters a lot of buffers, a lot of defense buffers, invincibility buffers, all of those shield buffers, everything. He just goes through all beneficial effects and deals raw damage. So if you are playing against a team that has, for example, a unit that actually before the buff endure buff is coming, he's also a good Theomars counter, since First of all, Mars gets his passive when he's really low, and KARAMBIT can simply finish him off. That will change once the Endure buff comes to the global server, but for now you can still use him at that. But other than that, he's just an amazing unit to deal that raw damage, and if you are fighting a team that can, for example, bring those shields or invincibility effects up often, you can simply ignore those and still deal raw damage. So if the enemy does not have a healer, that unit will essentially permanently lose his HP and will be very vulnerable to KARAMBIT's attacks. And of course, the main use for KARAMBIT are the PvE scenarios. So I'll try to address all of them. So one surprising area where he performs really well is Trial of Ascension and Spire of Ascensions. A lot of the higher up stages, especially like starting 150 and above, have a lot of units that give shields or give an invincibility, and when the first time I built him over Mars, I actually went up like 15 stages of TOA instantly when I was stuck on, for example, 175 or something like hard. I instantly shot up like 15 stages just because he could counter a lot of those buff teams, and simply will allow you to just get that slight edge in climbing both towers. Second of all, Kairos. He's really good in pretty much all dungeons except the water one due to the being fire element. He's an amazing counter to the wind one, since the wind does have a buff where he gets permanent invincibility unless it's either removed or you block beneficial effects prior to it being put on. So with KARAMBIT you no longer have to worry about the invincibility, as he will simply deal damage through it. For other dungeons, of course, he may not offer a specific counter to the dungeon. However, his damage, from what I've seen, on average is a little better than Mars's. First of all, because Mars needs a higher setup. So for Mars to deal damage, you will be needing a defense break. And if you do not want to bring the defense break, or if you cannot bring the defense break, KARAMBIT is a great option, as he will just deal raw damage even ignoring some defense. And I actually built an all-around team for a lot of dungeons, including Kairos, Path of Growth, Expeditions, using a Bastet, KARAMBIT, and this Dark guy. Of course, a lot of you might not have the Dark Harg, but you can use any other support unit. If you are struggling a bit, you can use a healer like Onamiya. If you are having an easier time dealing with dungeons, you can go for another damage dealer or even a brand unit, a defense break unit, stuff like that. And yeah, for Path of Growth, of course, I'm not going to cover the two on the sides, as those are super easy in my opinion. For this one, of course, you won't counter the border ones due to the element disadvantage, but I found that first of all, Forgotten Earth Shrine, you do use your Water Lich here. However, since the boss does buff up defense quite a bit, you can also deal way more damage compared to Mars, just because you can go through that defense whenever he puts it up. For Lava Cave as well, not as much benefit to both of these in going through the effects, but it does allow you to deal that raw damage without a defense break setup. So for example, this guy, I believe this guy buffs up anti-crit, so the KARAMBITs, well, let me see, where does it say there? It doesn't say not there. Applies crit rate up, crit damage, no, damage taken down, there you go. When he gets damage taken down, since KARAMBIT's attacks ignore beneficial effects, he simply ignores that effect, and this means that, first of all, you do not need a defense breaker to do a lot of damage. Second of all, you do not need a buff blocker or a stripper to remove that damage taken down effect to deal significant damage. For this boss, he only gives offensive buffs to himself, but even then, KARAMBIT performs decent damage. However, Max is also an option here. So this is sort of a neutral dungeon where he does work, but does not give any benefit to it, let's say. Expeditions, of course, until the Endure nerf comes, this guy, super good counter to his not invincibility, Endure buff, since when this boss drops to 10% HP, he gets a very long-lasting Endure buff. I think it lasts like 30 seconds or so. And if you do slightly more damage than he heals, or you have a heal block, he will simply go through that Endure and kill him off real quickly. For other dungeons, of course, Fire Talat, this Wind, Arachne, Dark Borbo is pretty good. Only Fire Talades is where he outperforms Tiamar's. The other two, he's pretty equal compared to Tiamar's. And Last Reckless scored the same as the Expedition, so I already covered it there, so that's that. For party dungeons, now this is the main point where Karambit becomes super good. So first of all, these two. For this one, you do tend to bring AoE damage into it, but Karambit is also a good option for just the auto runs and ensuring that you do damage. The run will be a little bit slower, but it will be at least be safe, and you'll have an easier time killing the boss as well. The area where he shines a lot is the Distorted Sky Island. Previously, before you had Karambit, and if you did not bring any stripper, I think the strippers actually don't even work for that, this boss would buff up invincibility, meaning that you could no longer do runs on auto once you reach the phase 3. And other stages as well, it will be a little harder to do damage to a lot of the units around the map, unless you removed the specific buff towers. I'm not sure what they're called. Whenever a wave starts, you get a few buff towers, and once you destroy those, you will get a certain beneficial effects removed from all enemies. So with Karambit, you no longer need to remove those buffs, and you can just go straight for enemies, as he will simply ignore all beneficial effects, as well as go right through that boss's wave 3 shield, meaning that if you all three members of yours have a Karambit, you will kill that boss in like 20 seconds easily, just because of the raw damage that Karambit does while ignoring beneficial effects and part of the defense. And as for raids, I'm ignoring first two, of course. Elite 40 Prison, a lot of damage dealers are an option, since you do land the defense break pretty early on, and that raw ignore defense damage is not as beneficial, as the bosses do not gain any power based on whether you kill them fast or slow. But for the other two dungeons, both of these dungeons are insane damage checks. So if you do not have enough damage or a good setup to do enough damage, you will be failing your runs. This means that that extra a few seconds before you land a defense break, if you even have a defense break, and you should have a defense break for these two dungeons, those extra few seconds that you can do ignore defense damage will really pay off in making these runs way more successful, since you do need to deal a certain amount of damage in around 15 to 20 seconds in both of these bosses' phases, otherwise you do lose the run. So he's, in my opinion, a way better option than other similar units like Theomars. I'm mostly talking about free units. I'm not delving deep into the units like 5-star units like Lupinus, Brandy, and stuff like that. Mostly comparing it to free-to-play units, because Karambit itself is free-to-play, so a majority of people will only have a few options like Karambit and Theomars. But yeah, he's amazing in this dungeon. He's pretty much a requirement in this dungeon, since this boss does get that unremovable invincibility as well. And you do want to be dealing damage through the invincibility in the meantime, while you are still breaking invincibility on the boss, dealing that a little bit extra damage on top. And yeah, as for PvP scenarios, Battlefield, I use my Karambit as a main damage dealer. However, I cannot say whether he's too good or too bad there, since Battlefield currently is pretty unbalanced due to the matchmaking, and yeah, I can't speak for Battlefield as the gameplay itself is not as much focused on the units you use and the damage you deal as more of a strategy overall that you plan with your teammates. From the arenas, I've had pretty great success with him. I found that he performs really well in those long sustained battles over the very quick damage dealer, sort of multiple damage dealer ones. As he'll simply, at first, he may not do a lot of damage, but once the time progresses, that quick damage he can deal really stacks up, as well as having his passive passively stack up attack speed. He'll The longer the fight goes, the more attack speed you will be getting, meaning that he really does perform a little bit later into the game when like a minute or two passes. But yeah, this is pretty similar for both Challenge Arena. In Challenge, of course, you have more control, as you can see the enemy units. For Brawl Arena, you will have to pick him around the enemy's team as well, and I see that Karambit is often picked by the enemy in their first two picks. However, Tiomars does get the priority, first of all, because of his element build being advantageous against Karambit, and second of all, because Tiomars in general in Arena has a little bit of an edge due to the Endeavor passive and the range he gets. But yeah, as I said, Karambit is mostly focused on PvE content rather than PvP, and yeah. Now jumping into the builds, runes, and everything else you have to know about it in there. So first of all, skill ups, of course. I think I don't have to mention this again, but do not use most nat 5s if you do not have max skill. So for this guy, first skill is of course necessary to be maxed, otherwise you're losing on a lot of damage. Second and third skills are nice to have, not necessary, but they will definitely improve your runs a lot. Ultimate, in my opinion, is not needed, as you will not be using him as a soul link monster most of the time, due to his second and third skills not being too great to use manually. But yeah, just make sure that you at least have his first skill max and try to max out the second and third skill. If you manage to get the ultimate skill up, well, it's even better. Extra power, extra usefulness, I suppose. And yeah, for awakening, at first you will only be able to awaken him to level 9, as level 10 requires additional dupes to be summoned. I managed to get one during the Summoned Raven event, and if you plan on using him, I also plan on using him and of course have 200 or more mystical skulls. I actually recommend going for a dupe here, but if you do not go for a dupe, that's also fine, as I'm pretty sure you will have an easy time getting the dupes in the future, especially with the use of like the blessing, which you can see I also put my Karambit there. And yeah, so awakenings, of course, as with any nat 5 unit that we get a lot of free skill ups for, try to not use his monster pieces to evolve his skills, and instead only save them for monster awakening. If you do not have enough skill ups to use him right off the bat, I suggest waiting and skilling him up with Devilmons once you have them. There is an amazing event now where you actually get 7 Devilmons in total, so although you may need to wait a little bit, it is better to wait, as those extra awakenings really do bring a lot of power. As you can see, if I got another dupe, that would instantly grant me around 3000 power with his current runes, and from the stats perspective you get around 100 attack, 60 defense, and like 1,200 HP. So it's definitely worth waiting for dupes here and not using them in skills. And now going towards the most important part, so the builds and the runes that you use for him. So by far, the most important rune here is the Swift rune, and the stat being the attack speed. This stat, unlike other units, for example like Tiamar's, where you could, well, in general, you would want attack speed, crit, and crit damage, as well as some attack. Those stats would be sort of equal on other units. However, for Karambit, attack speed has a lot more weight due to his passive. So his fourth skill is a passive which essentially applies attack speed up to itself with a certain chance if the attack successfully hits. So he has a 5% chance to get a level 1 attack speed buff. That buff of course stacks, so you can get multiple ones. Due to this, his attack speed is getting way more value compared to any other stat, and even if you build him on no crit rate, no crit damage at all, but manage to get insane attack speeds from there, it will actually be way more useful compared to a regular damage build, just because he would be able to stack that attack speed way more often, and through buffs increase his damage there. But of course, you should not go for a raw attack speed build and ignore any other stats, as simply not enough substats exist in the game that would grant only attack speed, and most runes do have 4 substats, so you should still focus on getting attack speed, crit damage, and attack. Other decent stats are of course defense and HP, since you will be using him in a lot of bosses, and it's nice to have that extra sustain there. Good thing is he does not need any accuracy for his skills, as the debuffs. Wait, he actually doesn't even provide debuffs, if I believe. Yeah, it's beneficial ignoring and defense penetration. These are buffs, and this is defense penetration, not defense, but penetration. This one does not need it. Yeah, so he actually has 0 debuffs, so accuracy is a completely useless stat on him. Resistance, up to you. If you have some substats, you can go for it, but definitely not needed. First of all, because his second skill does give evasion up, which allows him to dodge 40% of attacks, of basic attacks landed on him. And for other stats, precision, evasion, of course, evasion is a decent bonus together with the second skill buff. Precision, of course, useful, but don't go too overboard with it, as not a lot of units have specific evasion builds, so definitely won't be needing too much of precision, but it's nice to have a few subs of it. And for runes themselves, mine is currently built on Swift. I had him on Swift Guard, I believe, just because Guard runes are the ones I found the most, and I had a lot of good sets there. Now he's on Swift and Broken, but as long as you have the Swift set, in my opinion, that's more than enough to bring a lot of potential for him. But the top sets I would recommend are Swift Blade, of course, so that will be the ultimate set for him. If you cannot get Swift Blade and simply have better runes instead of those 2 Blade runes, just go for a Swift build, Swift Broken. So you have a Swift set, and the other 2 set is simply whatever best runes that you have. This allows you to check for the best substats on all 6 slots and actually bring, in most cases, even more power than a Blade set would. If you do not have access to Swift, which I highly recommend getting, especially for this guy, you can go for regular damage dealer sets, so that includes Rage Blade, Fatal Blade, or Triple Blade. And if you do not have access to any of those, Karambit might be too early to build for you, since he does mostly perform in those higher level dungeons. And if you do not have access to at least 5-star blue runes of either Swift Rage Blade or Fatal, he will not be as much use for you as other units early in the game. As for stats, of course, slot 2, without a doubt, is attack speed. That's the most important one, and there is no debate about it. As for slot 4 and 6, it depends on how much crit rate you are able to build on him. For slot 6, of course, it's attack, but for slot 4, I currently have mine on crit rate, as I did not get a lot of good crit damage runes. But I did get okayish crit damage from substat, so he does pull his damage pretty well as well. The crit rate you should build depends on the team you use. I built mine on exactly 70 because I use him with Kroa, who gives additional 30% for buffs. If you do not have a crit rate buffer, you will of course want to get a little bit higher crit rate, probably closer to 85 or so, and dumping the rest of the stats into attack speed, attack, and crit damage. And yeah, for the runes, that's about it. I think I've covered a good amount of why Karambit is an amazing unit. I definitely recommend building him, especially for the parts where you are sort of done with the story and are looking to progress towards the raids and higher level dungeons. I'd say a good time to build him is when you are building your team for the Elite Foggy Prison, and if you do have a little bit more progress when you are trying to go into the Elite White Shadow Castle, as this is where he starts to really shine, and once built, he will be pulling his weight in PvE a lot. And yeah, that's about it for Karambit. If you have any other questions about him, just feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll make sure to answer it whenever I get back. And that's about it. Peace.